Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. It's Thursday morning, Erev Shabbat Parshat Bamidbar, and right before Shavuot. Due to an event that's happening tonight, a special zchut that Shirat David was invited to go to Rabbi Ginsburg's house in Kfar Chabad, we've decided that we're going to record tonight's Zera Shimshon Shir so that way we don't have any conflict. So today we're going to be doing a shir or lesson about in advance of Matan Torah, in advance of Shavuot. We're doing a piece from the Zera Shimshon on Parshat Bamidbar, which is very much connected to Matan Torah. The drush that we're going to do is drush Gimel, Parshat Bamidbar, and it starts as follows. The parsha starts the first pasuk on this week's parsha. It says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe limor, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'Har Sinai limor." So the Midrash says, again, Drush Gimel of Zera Shimshon says, Midrash Yalkut al Pasuk Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'Sha'ah shekiblu Yisrael et HaTorah nitkanu behem umot ha'olam maru litkarev yoter ma'an ha'amot. Right. So at the time when Bnei Israel were receiving the Torah, the other nations of the world said, "I don't understand. Why do they get it? We're jealous." Satam pihem Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'amar lehem haviu li sefer yuchasin shalachem shneimar havu lashem mishpachot damim kishem shebanai mevi'im v'yitialdu al mishpachotam v'chach mena'am b'rosh hasefer b'achar mitzvot ela mitzvot asher tzivah Hashem al bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai v'achar kach vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai su et rosh kol adam bnei Yisrael shelo zachu litol et haTorah ela b'shvil hayichusin shalem ad kan lashono. So the Midrash continues and says that the nations of the world were complaining and saying, "We're jealous, we want the Torah too." Hashem, Kivyachol, closes their mouth and says, "Bring about your book of inheritance." As it says in the Pasuk in Tehillim, it says, "Havula Hashem mishpachot damim." Bring to Hashem, literally bring to Hashem the families of the nations. Just like it says, and the Midrash continues and says, "Kishem shebanai mevi'im vayitialdu al mishpachotam." Just like my children, that is Bnei Israel, brings that they have generations, that each generation were born and they have the genealogies according to their families. So that's why it says at the beginning of this week's beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, right after it says Elah HaMitzvot, at the end of last week's Parshat at B'Har Sinai, it says at the end of Bahar or Bechukotai, it says the end of Sefer Vayikra ends with Elah HaMitzvot asher tzivah Hashem al bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai. And then again, it says, So he's saying that the connection between last week's parsha and this week's parsha is that right after the mitzvot, Hashem, or after giving the mitzvot and delivering the mitzvot of Sefer Vayikra, Hashem now continues to count them out of. He says, they didn't merit to receive the Torah if not for their lineage, meaning their lineage and their heritage that they have is indeed one of the main reasons that, according to this Midrash, they received the Torah. Now, what we're going to do is, in order to save time, Drush Gimel is actually quite long, and so we're going to go to, in about 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs in four, it starts with V'od yesh lomar. So I'm going to kind of give a spoiler on the middle one, the part that we're skipping. It says Tzarich Iyun. In that area, there quotes the famous Gemara in Avodah Zarah on Daf Bet Amud Bet, and it quotes the famous Gemara about the argument about back and forth between the nations of the world and Bnei Israel and Hashem as to why they received the Torah. The question as to whether would you keep this mitzvah or you could keep the other mitzvah, etc. And they basically who's deserving of it and whether so in this one, in the part that we're kind of skipping over, it talks about Hashem says the nations of the world say that the nations are Bnei Israel, just like the nations they were over, they transgressed and committed sins that were of Sheva Mitzvah Bnei Noach. But before the Sefer Torah, before Matan Torah, they were considered also liable with those mitzvot as well. And Bnei Israel were also just as bad in terms of their transgressing of those mitzvot. That's the argument that has and the argument that Hashem gives back and says, no, since they come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and they are considered their children, so they didn't have those mitzvot, and basically the Zera Shimshon proves that the entire thing that it was done there was done b'shogeg. And since they're his children, they're not named Noach. They're considered. They were doing it out of b'shogeg. That's what that's the basically summary of it, right? So that's and what they did in Mitzrayim, right? So it says, even though we said that they did in Mitzrayim, they were all out of shogeg or out of ones. So that's the first one. The second, what we're going to start with is V'od Yesh Lomar. So now they continue with the conversation between Bnei Israel and the other nations of the world and Hashem, meaning it's a two-way conversation between the nations of the world and Hashem, but it's about Bnei Israel, and every so often we'll get to that part too. So it says, V'od Yesh Lomar Shahomot Amatimim. The nations have a question. Maru Yisraelit Karev Lomar Nasev Nishma Kedei LeKabel HaTorah Yoter Mishar HaMot Shelo Yechlu Kabla. Right, so why is it now the Bnei Israel and continuing the nations of the world say, why did Bnei Israel merit to say Nasev Nishma more than any other ones? Right, the nations of the world say that rather they did Nasev Nishma because they wanted to have it. They being Bnei Israel wanted to have some sort of upper hand. They wanted to do it out of pride. They said we're all going in the same level, so they will imagine a situation where everyone's in the same level. The first person to speak he says yes, I'll do it, whatever. Not because they understand everything, but they do it because they want to be first, or they want to be. They'd rather just get it done. So instead of saying, "Wait a minute, I want to understand what my role and responsibility is," they just say yes. Now 70 Shema, we'll do it, and then we'll worry about hearing and figure out the details later, right? So that was really like their haste. The nations of the world are saying Bnei Israel's haste, and maybe even their eagerness was not out of the right reasoning or right motive, but their motive was to be, they were saying it out of haughtiness, meaning out of pride, and they were doing it out of gava. Right? We know that Bnei Israel often, right, they're considered the low nation, the nation that's, always the one that's the underdog. And since they are the underdog, they didn't have a choice but to do this. It was to kind of lift them up. They wanted to accept the Torah to lift them up. So their intentions, according to the nations of the world, according to the Umat Olam, in the argument to Hashem, their intentions were not pure. They weren't right. Right? So he says that the one option, and there's going to be two arguments. One argument is that the Umat Olam say is, option one is that their intentions were wrong. Their intentions were, we just want to get this done. We have no choice. We're always being beaten down. We're always being hurt. So here's our chance to get out of the situation. Let's do it. Let's take the Torah. We'll say Nasev Nishma. We'll do it. We'll say yes first, and then we'll understand the details later. Maybe not. Maybe their motives were not necessarily correct according to the Umat Olam. That's option one. The other option, another way of explaining it, so then the Umat Olam are saying for that option, the Umat Olam are saying is then Bnei Israel, Hashem should have accepted Bnei Israel's claim because he should have known that they're doing it for the wrong reasons. The second reason is inami. We could also explain that what the Bnei Israel were saying, what the Umat Olam were saying. Shema shenitratzu lekabel Torah yoter misharat Umat Olam lifi shehem azim yoter mehem va'azut hu siman shehem ra'im b'tivam v'im kain ru'yim hem litcharachek v'lo litkarev. Right, so he says that the second reason that perhaps we can explain what the nations of the world were saying about Bnei Israel is that the reason why, unlike the rest of the world, the rest of the nations, the Jewish people agreed to accept the Torah because they were more bold, meaning they were just willing to do it. Just like I said, in a crowd, there's always going to be that person says, "Yeah, let's do it right away." When you do that right away, your intentions are usually not pure, meaning either you're doing it because you're in such a bad state, you're just going to say, yeah, I'll do it, or you're saying it, yeah, I want to do it because I want to be that guy. I want to be that first guy. Now, either way, the nations of the world are saying is their intentions were not right. Whether you say it's their intentions were not right because they're saying is we are saying it, yeah, because because we're being so low, so that because I'm in such a vulnerable state, I'm going to say yes no matter what because I have nothing better. I have no better option. And the other option is they're saying is they're doing it because they're doing it, that was out of pride. And the other option is they're doing it out of being bold because they want to be the first. And they didn't really understand. They're just saying is Nasev Nishma. So either way, the Umot Olam are claiming about Bnei Israel. However you understand the two sides of the argument, either one of them, the Umot Olam are claiming that Bnei Israel's intentions were wrong. Now what happens here is now we have the response of Hashem. Masa Kadosh Baruch Hu, Satam PM Shalamot. Now the Zera Shimshon is going to weave in parts of the Midrash back into what the Midrash that we learned originally, the beginning of this piece. And he says, Hashem did as he closed the mouths of the other Umot Olam, the other nations. Bring me your books of lineage. And he says, if you look at the books of lineage, you'll see that what you're trying to claim is not accurate. And he says, Sharei, Esav Machar Bechor Torah Yaakov. He says, go back to the Torah. You'll see what happens. What happens in the Torah? And we know the story of Yaakov and Esav. Esav sells the Bechorah to Yaakov, and therefore disproving that Yaakov is a low underdog kind of person, a nation. So that undermines that claim that Bnei Israel accepted Torah because they were in a low state and they were just doing it because they were vulnerable. So he says, even more so, he says, look, the Jewish people have a very strong lineage descending from, the Avot HaKadoshim, and they're more fitting than other nations than the ones you're claiming, the ones who are claiming against Bnei Israel. That the Torah is called a tushiyah. It's called something that is it's wisdom, and in order to get it's mateshet kocho means it makes people. You have to work hard to get Torah. You can't just get Torah. It doesn't just come, through osmosis. You have to really work for it. So you need that real strength. And he quotes the famous Gemara in Baba Metzia, in Sanhedrin, the Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, the Gemara in Baba Metzia, it says on Daf Pei Daled, it says in Daf Pei Daled Amud Aleph, it says that Rabbi Yochanan says to Rabbi Lakish, right? I mean, you work your extraordinary strength in Torah, right? You should have that strength to learn Torah. And it says, person with lineage, right? A person who has a strong lineage has that strength to continue to learn Torah. It's similar in some ways to what we said in a previous Jewish of the Zera Shimshon, that we said that people that are learning Torah, we're willing to go that extra mile no matter where it is to learn Torah. Jews, no matter what, wherever we are, whether we're put under duress or whatever situation, we're always going to find a way to learn Torah. It's that strength that we have, that we know that our forefathers are continuing the tradition of previous generations. I think that's, if we want to summarize the entire piece that we're going to go through, that's really the overall theme, is that we're willing to work hard. For Torah, you have to work hard. It's first part. And second of all, not only do you have to work hard for it, but beyond working hard for it, we're also doing is that we appreciate the fact that we're connected. We're tapping into something that goes much longer than very far back. Excuse me. So it continues, and he says, "Mishu miyuchas yesho zakoch kedamarina bepsachim miyom shegnaz yisefir chazim tashash kocham shel chalachamim." He says that the pure elevated lineage that brings us strength, and since we have that, it gives Bnei Israel have that pure lineage that goes back from generation to generation to generation, and so therefore it gives them the necessary strength to continue Torah. And then he says, "Uma shehem azim," and now the fact that you were telling me before we said that they were bold, you continue to say that they were bold. So he says, "Mashem azim eno siman ra lahem chas v'shalom el adarab siman tov shecholim lochiach echad et chaver b'chol kocho ve'eno mitresh umar lo lachorecha or a chazor lachorecha or el apsul sheyesh b'nifishachacha k'mo shasa pinchas heritem ben puti zeh shepitem avi imo." He says now to the claim or to the argument that you say that Bnei Israel are bold or they're stiff and they're doing it just because they just want to be that first person. He says, no, it's a good thing. It's not being bold and having azut is a good thing. Just like with Pinchas, he knew that people were going to say what they claimed, according to the Midrash, that they claimed, did you see what Pinchas is doing? He knew what he's up against. And even with what he's up against, he's still willing to be bold. And that is something he said, when we have the willingness, we have what we call today chutzpah, where we have the chutzpah to do something or say something that may not necessarily be right, but we're doing it because we believe in, and we have something, we believe in that idea. And when we have that chutzpah, people appreciate it, right? But we're not as scared or fearful of the repercussions. Va'od. And now he says, what's the advantage of having a strong lineage? He says, he says that person who has pure lineage, and I have what to stand up from. In other words, I'm I have a backing and a pure lineage, he's someone who's a man of peace. Whereas an impure lineage becomes, they become someone who's not necessarily aligned with all the different values, meaning they have a strong values from that go back generation to generation. It's much easier for them to stand on their to stand calmly and stand proudly. But a person who's mixed up with different nations and mixed from different cultures, it's very hard for them to stand because they're confused. They've gotten influence from different places. They don't know where they're from. They don't have the origin. They don't have their origins. So it makes them suitable to receive the Torah because it goes back to why Bnei Israel suitable to the Torah, because they can channel their traits of boldness in a positive manner. So in other words, that they are people of peace. Bnei Israel are known to be people of peace, but when we need to be bold, we can do that. לפי שהם עשים, כלומר שיש להם כוח, נתן להם התורה שהיא עוז, והעוז שלהם בא מחמת היחס שהוא סימן שלום, משום הכי סיים הכתוב, השם יברך דמו בשלום. So Zera Shimshon brings up another idea of what the pasuk that we always say, Hashem oz yivarech, Hashem oz amo yiten, Hashem yivרך damo bashalom. Hashem oz is another word for Torah. Oz is a sense of boldness, but it's also another word for Torah. And he says that Hashem gave us this Torah, which is might, which is a strength, right? And he says that teaches that due to Bnei Israel's boldness, which caused them to be fearless and mighty, meaning the Torah gives us that strength. And because we have that strength, we have this resilience and this ability to kind of go through things and be and stand strong and be resilient and hold our own. And it's a calmness. And so that way we are people of peace, and we use that sense of peace. And when we need to, we can be bold. But most of the time, we try to be people of peace and people of serenity. So according to the second piece, the Bnei Israel were accused of by the other nations of the world that they chose the Torah for the wrong reasons. There wasn't really, they were choosing it out of either being out of vulnerability or their low nature, and they were being claimed that they were doing it for the wrong reasons. And Hashem said that no, in both cases, their lineage shows that they have the ability from the lineage, that is that Yaakov indeed was the Bechor, or Yaakov was at least bought the Bechorah from Esav. And also he says the nations of the world said that Bnei Israel's boldness shouldn't be considered a good thing. Hashem says no, it is a good thing. It's that the fact that they are strong, that from their lineage, meaning they're historically from generation to generation, their lineage and their being bold has proven time and again that boldness at the right time is a positive trait. Now he says we have to understand why he's going to ask the question as to why this whole conversation takes place in Sefer Bamidbar on the first pasuk of Sefer Bamidbar, when it really should have come across around the time of Matan Torah, which would have been in Shmot or in Vadchanan, but this is not the right place for this midrash. Not to say that happens to be that Bamidbar always precedes Shavuot, and therefore it does work. But in this context, he's going to ask a question around the parsha. He says, how do we know that this pasuk really, how did the midrash take it out or pull out this idea from the pasuk that is the opening Sefer Bamidbar? למה אמר כתוב במדבר סיני, דדי היה שיאמר וידבר השם אל משה באוהל מועד באחד לחודש השני בשנה השנית, וממילא אנו יודעים שבמדבר סיני היו, שהרי לא נסעו משם אלא ב-20 לחודש, כי דכתיב ויהי בשנה השנית נעלה ענן מעל משכן העדות. So he says, why does the question was raised? Why does the word Bamidbar Sinai even appear at the pasuk at all in the opening of Sefer Bamidbar? We don't need it. It's an extra piece of 2 extra words kiviyachol that are not necessary. Right? We could have, without that, we would have known. And in fact, even more so, right? When Bnei Israel didn't go anywhere, we wouldn't have thought that they were anywhere else but Midbar Sinai, right? The previous Sefer Vayikra takes place in the Midbar. We weren't told, and the Rashi brings a famous, Rashi brings a midrash that Bnei Israel didn't leave Midbar Sinai or didn't move anywhere from Midbar Sinai until the 20th of the month. Right, so if that's the case, so if they 20th of ER, so if from the beginning of ER till now they were still in Midbar Sinai, so why would we have thought otherwise? So meaning the question is that he's asking is, I understand the word being Midbar Sinai is unnecessary. We wouldn't have thought anything else, and we know that the words of the Torah, every word is very important. So what is the extra value here? Ad kan no, that's the what the Mefarshim asked this question, and then he says. That we have to understand this question with the Midrash is coming to teach us something. He says because of this lineage that we have is what allowed us to, which this parsha will go to explain, is the Jewish people merited to receive the Torah in Sinai. V'yuvan, according to this, what we said, the purpose of receiving the Torah, the Jewish people lineage was, why does the Bamidbar start with all the families and everything like that? It's to highlight the lineage, right? To highlight the lineage of Bnei Israel, and that is what guided Hashem to say, you have a strong lineage, and that's to prove to the nations of the world that this lineage is exactly the point, exactly we can go back from generation to generation and say we started Avraham Avinu and we can still continue from Avraham Avinu to the nations, till the Shvatim, until the families. And you show, like, if you show your strong lineage from generation to generation, they deserve to receive the Torah because it's their strong lineage. And then it says, we have a question that he's going to ask a question that I think is a good one, and it's raised. It comes up right away. And he says, he says, now we understand that now that we have proved that part of receiving the Jewish people, part of our strength is our lineage and our heritage, right? Is that we have this, and also the fact that we are people of peace, right? So he says that we also have a question as to why it says mishbechotam leveit avotam, the leveit avotam davka v'lo leveit imotam. Now we have a question, and he says that perhaps it says leveit avotam, it doesn't say leveit imotam. The question, overall question is, we know that women are the ones with the family, Jewish tradition and Jewish religion follows after the mother, meaning if the mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. The grandmother is Jewish, the grandchild is Jewish. The mother, right after the mothers. So the question is, why does it say Leveit Avotam? Like I said, the legitimacy of the family usually comes to the women. Right? And he says, so why? So the question is, he says, why is it that if we know that women were the ones that we know that lineage goes after the women, and we know in Mitzrayim that is to honor the women, that in Mitzrayim, in a time of slavery, in a time of real struggle, the women were the ones who protected the Jewish family by keeping their honor and keeping their husbands' pride, meaning respecting their husbands even when the husbands were working in breaking labor. The women encouraged them, and the women really strengthened them. And then the umoto, and this was the idea, was that the women are keeping the tradition. So the question is, why is it say leveit avotam? It should say leveit imotam. And he says, is the umoto olam, their claim is that if the Bnei Israel were able to be enslaved, the men were able to be enslaved. So if Mitzrayim was able to do the enslave the men, I'm sure that the women also. So the question, he says that no, the women, it's to disprove them. That's why the Jewish heritage goes after the woman. So the question, he says, Ella, משום הכי דווקא לבית אבותם, שבנשים לא שייך זה, שכל אחת יושבת בביתה בייחודת כל כבודה בת מלך פנימה. So he says, is that the women, when the men were going out into Mitzrayim, and they were doing this work, and they did complain, but the level of complaint was calm, and they were able to, when they go out into the field, and their approach and their mannerisms were calm, and were signs of peace, and they don't argue with each other, and they were just doing and accepting it. And while the women were at home, and also being modest and not making a big, they might have taken some bold steps, but they were doing it in a way that's calm and accepting. So the men were out there, and the men were showing that, reflecting and kind of showing their outward way, an outward manner, what their approach is. So that's why it says Oveit Avotam, because the men were the ones who were out there and showing it. And if you really want to say, is that the women were influencing the men from the inside, and the men were the outward expression of that influence. So it should say the Beit Avotam is what was going on outside of the house. Inside the house, it was the women, and therefore the women were the ones that get respect for the women, meaning we do continue the Jewish tradition through women, but and the lineage continues through the women, but the men were the ones who were out there, so therefore they got that kind of Beit Avotam. Now it says and now we can say, and go back to the Midrash, it says, Matan Torah, Shara'u Yisrael HaMelachim, Shayu Osim Dgalim, Nitavu Li Dgalim, V'Kadosh Baruch Hu Amar LeMoshe, Lech V'aseh Lehem Otam Dgalim, V'ayin Sham, Sharei Ketiv, V'gam Kol Ha'am Hazeh, al Mekomot Yabov Shalom. So he says, now we can understand perhaps the other midrash that's famous in this week's parsha is that Bnei Israel, when they were receiving the Torah, they saw that the Malachim came down, and they saw that the Malachim were ordered, they have organized, everything's according to a certain schedule in a certain place, and they had these wonderful flags, the Galim, whatever the Galim actually mean, flags or signs or place. And the reason why Hashem said that is, and then the pasuk says, and that's why it says, the entire people, they want this order. They realize that by having order and having a place in society, every person's place, things work. And when things work, there's peace. And when things don't work, there isn't peace. And so he says, that's the Gemara says, now every person has their place. Because Bnei Israel said, look at how peaceful the Malachim are. When the Malachim were coming down and they showed a sense of peace and calm and serenity, so Bnei Israel said, we want that too. So Hashem said, no problem, I'll bring peace among you. And you want that because they don't have machloket, they're not arguing. When we don't have machloket, that's when peace can happen. We can't unorganized chaos creates a disorganized or organized chaos creates a sense of uncertainty. And when we have certainty, that's when you can have peace and walk and go through confidently. And so he says, Zera Shimshon is going to bring other examples of what happens when things are not organized. Right? So even when Bilam came to try to curse the nation, he said, look at the nation, when the nation is at peace and their tents are organized and their tents are in the right place and everyone knows their place, no nations can do anything. There's nothing that the nations can do because and look at the flags that show where everyone belongs and everyone has a place. And that's when everyone knows their place, and therefore everything can be appropriate and peaceful. And he says the whole existence of the Satan is to create the disarray, right? And that obviously peace is the opposite of what the Satan brings to the table. So the Zera Shimshon brings proofs of a few examples. One is when Bnei Israel were leaving Mitzrayim and there was utter chaos. He says, they're confused. The confusion was caused by the Satan. And that's what what Paro was saying about Bnei Israel, is that they were confused. They're in disarray because they're unsure, right? And therefore, when they're unsure, Paro was saying is, don't worry, the Satan is going to get to them. The Satan didn't, but there was a sense of confusion. Same thing with the Meraglim, right? You all came to me, you all approached me. The Gemara, the Buvia is the Rashi on that spot says that we came with confusion. They came with disarray and being kind of disorganized, and they brought this whole disorganization came from the Satan. So he just brings multiple examples, and we go through history. If you look through the Chumash and you see the arguments that happen and the sins, the different sins, whether it's Cheta Egel, whether it's right when they're leaving, when Bnei Israel are leaving Mitzrayim, whether it's the Meraglim, you see all these different sins. There's always a sense of chaos beforehand. Now we can go. Now it goes to a topic which is it moves a little bit, he shifts a little bit, but it's actually connected in a very strong way. And he said, now we're going to this approach that it's their elevated lineage, which is a lineage of peace, a lineage of calm, a lineage of serenity, and a lineage that can be proven and tracked back many generations. That lineage, now we can explain a strange conversation that happens between Hosea and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it says, if we look in Hosea Perak Aleph, and it says, Hosea says to Hashem, Hashem tells Hosea beforehand. Hashem before that, Hosea has the azut, the chutzpah to tell Hashem, listen, just wipe them all out and replace the nation, right? Delete and put a different and replace them with a different nation, because basically Hosea is kind of, in some ways, Hosea was kind of giving up, and Hashem is saying to him, go take a family, go take a woman who is inappropriate, and children who are inappropriate. What is the connection between the two? How is taking a different wife who is not a pure lineage, or children from not a pure lineage or inappropriate, how is that going to be reflective of Hashem saying, taking a new nation? Right? We have to explain that Jewish people merited to be close to Hashem only as a result of their lineage. He says, Hashem was telling Hosea, the whole reason why Bnei Israel's strength and Bnei Israel's continued success is their lineage, is their strong lineage from generation to generation. You're telling me to take them out, then you're basically going to be like the rest of the nations. What's so unique about it? In fact, and it doesn't mention it here, but it would be an interesting insight, is that there was Moshe said the same thing, or Hashem said the same thing to Moshe. Hashem said to Moshe, these nation is sinning and they're continuously sinning. I'll just wipe them out and we'll start again from you. And Moshe says, no, Moshe, no, Hashem, we have to take this nation. It's their, I'm sure if they're a stiff-necked nation, but it's to their strength. And it's to their, you are the ones who chose, you Hashem are the one who chose this nation. So now, in some ways, if you want me to, I could add, it would say that Hashem is telling back to Hosea, saying, someone tried this already, meaning Moshe tried this idea. Moshe told me already once when I suggested the idea of taking them out, taking Bnei Israel, wiping them out, and just replacing them. But then what's unique about them? It's the fact that their lineage, right? So Hashem is saying back to Hosea, saying is, when I gave this information to Moshe, when I gave this option to Moshe as an alternative, Moshe said no. So now you, Hosea, are trying to give me that alternative. I'm going to tell you no. So he's saying is at the end of the day, the Bnei Israel, one of the reasons, and one of the main reason why we have Sefer Bamidbar is called the Book of Numbers in English. The Book of Numbers is because we continuously repeat and talk about the different numbers and different countings. It's because it's the nation, it's the family, it's the Bnei Israel is a family of is a nation of inheritance, meaning it's a nation of lineage. Our lineage can go back generation to generation. Even nowadays, you can find people who can track themselves back to David HaMelech or other great rabbanim or other great leaders of the nation. And once you get back to a certain time frame, you can get back to David and get back to Abraham. And you can see that is really the strength of Bnei Israel. Is not only is it that we are a proud and a strong nation, meaning we have the ability to be bold when we need to be. We're also a nation of peace, meaning we always like to find that level of peace. And even though we may argue in terms of, or we may raise an argument, our general sentiment or general kind of temperament is to be a peaceful nation. Same thing, we also are bold when we need to be. We can hold our own. Why? Because we have confidence in the previous 2,000 and 3,000 years that have helped us prove ourselves that even when times are tough, we know how to withstand it. And the way we withstand it is the Torah that we received, that was because of our lineage, that gives us the chance to, throughout generations, that even when things are tough, we continuously stay true to our nation, true to our name, both in terms of peace, also in terms of the Torah that we have that Hashem gave us, which is a sense of peace and a sense of strength. And so we have the sense of strength that allows us to be bold when we need to be. And it also gives us the confidence through the many generations that we know that history is behind us to give us the credibility throughout generations. Good Shabbos, good Yom Tov.